Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second week of this online instruction. I hope you all are doing well. This is the first video that covers monopolistic competition. So again, if you think back to this spectrum of competition that we've been talking about for the past few weeks, we've covered so far the two extreme ends of the spectrum. So in Chapter 8 of the textbook, we covered perfect competition. And in chapters 9 and 11, we covered monopoly. In chapter 10 of the textbook, it covers two different types of market structures that fall in the middle of this spectrum. So they're not, perfectly competitive or monopoly. They fall somewhere in the middle of these two extremes. This series of videos is going to be focusing on monopolistic competition. In another series of videos, we'll be covering oligopoly. But do keep in mind, however, that both of these market structures are covered in the same chapter of the textbook, chapter 10. So there will be one set of lecture notes that covers these two different market structures. Now, monopolistic competition is the most common type of market structure that exists in the United States. And this video is going to be explaining some of the key characteristics that define a market as one that looks like monopolistic competition, and talk about how this type of market structure directly relates to perfect competition and monopoly, the two market structures that we've already covered so far in the class. So again, like I just mentioned, chapter 10 will be covering both monopolistic competition and oligopoly, but for the purpose of keeping these two different market structures separate from one another, I decided to make two separate playlists on YouTube. But you will need to know both monopolistic competition and oligopoly before the next exam. So the breakdown of this chapter is pretty simple. The first half of the chapter covers monopolistic competition, and the second half of the chapter covers oligopoly. But it's important to note again that both of these different type of market structures fall under a category I guess we can define as imperfectly competitive. So firms and organizations that fall between the extremes of monopoly and perfect competition. And a simple definition of monopolistic competition, the market structure that we'll be focusing on in the next few videos, is that there are many firms competing to sell similar but differentiated products. So, what do I mean by differentiated products? You can think about differentiated products as a type of product that consumers perceive as distinctive in some way. So thinking back to perfect competition. Remember, in perfect competition, there are many, many firms selling the exact identical product. Monopolistic competition is a little bit different from that in the fact that, yes, there are still many firms in a market that is monopolistically competitive, but each firm is selling a product that is slightly different from one another or differentiated from one another. So you can think about markets or firms that are in a monopolistic competition setting as having their own mini little monopolies. Yes, all these different firms are selling goods that are very similar, but each firm is selling one that is, slightly different than everyone else. How are these goods slightly different from everyone else? Well, there could be many things that differentiate a product that a firm sells. So it could be the physical aspects of the good. It could be the location from which this good is sold from. There could be some intangible aspects of the product that make it slightly different from one firm to the next. Some examples, I guess, of intangible aspects would be like maybe one business offers a satisfaction guarantee or your money back type deal. Maybe one firm offers free delivery or free shipping, and other firms selling similar goods don't. And maybe there's just, this perception of one firm selling a good that's of a higher quality versus other goods that are selling something very similar. So a common thing that exists in monopolistic competition is like brand names. So even though there are, many different types of businesses that sell clothing, many types of businesses that sell shoes, all the different brands of clothing and all the different brands of shoes are all selling a product that is slightly different from one another, whether it be the physical aspects of the product, maybe, I don't know, some type of clothing is heavier or lighter, made with a different fabric, etc. Maybe when we're talking about shoes, maybe certain types of shoes are, slimmer or sleeker versus other types of shoes, et cetera, et cetera. So again, there are many different brands that try to differentiate themselves from one another, even though at the end of the day, they're all selling goods that are very similar. So this table, I think, is very useful, and I would pause the video and take some time to write this down in your notes, because this will really help you, I think, understand how monopolistic competition fits in the middle of the two extremes of market structures, and what aspects of monopolistic competition are similar to perfect competition, and what aspects of monopolistic competition are similar to monopoly. Because monopolistic competition has both monopoly and competition in the name. So there are aspects of both of these two extremes that come together to make a monopolistic competition type market structure. So again, I already mentioned this. Whenever we're talking about the number of sellers that exist in a certain type of market structure, monopolistic competition is very similar to perfect competition. There are many, many buyers selling products, as opposed to a monopoly where there's just one huge firm selling all of one type of product. In monopolistic competition, just like perfect competition, there are free entry and exit of firms. This will be important in the next video when we talk about what is the kind of long run outcomes of firms that exist in the monopolistic competition type market structure. So far, number of sellers and free entry and exit are exactly the same as perfect competition. Whenever we're talking about long run economic profits, again, perfect competition and monopolistic competition look very similar to one another. Firms in perfect competition and monopolistic competition both earn 0 long run economic profits. And we'll find out in the next video that, again, this is mainly driven by this free entry and exit of firms in this market. Monopoly, again, seems like the weird one out, that in the long run, monopoly is able to make positive long-run economic profits. And this is due to the fact that no other firms can really enter the market and compete with the one firm that is currently selling all of one type of good or service. Now, here's where perfect competition and monopolistic competition differ tremendously, and it's the type of product that the firm sells. Again, perfect competition, all of the firms in perfect competition are selling identical products. There is no differences at all between the type of product that these firms are selling in perfect competition. Monopolistic competition, however, is where the firms are selling similar products, but they are differentiated in some way. So again, referring back to the last slide, this could be, the physical size of the products, where the products are being sold, any kind of intangible things about the product that make them special or different. You can think of it kind of like a brand name is an easy way to kind of encompass all of those things together. So now we move into two different characteristics that look more like a monopoly as opposed to perfect competition. So with monopolistic competition, unlike perfect competition, there is some market power that these firms have. And this is very similar to a monopoly. So we learned in the last series of videos that because a monopoly has this market power, they're able to set a price that is higher than what the price would be if it was in perfect competition. They're able to set a price that is higher than where the marginal revenue is equal to the marginal cost. There's this monopoly markup where they're able to go all the way up to the demand curve to choose the price for the good. Monopolistic competition is very similar to that, identical to that in the short run. And we'll explore this more in the next video. And if you remember from the Monopoly videos, we kind of explored the difference between the firm demand curve for a perfectly competitive firm and the firm demand curve for a monopoly. And we saw that because all of the firms in perfect competition are selling the exact same thing, the demand for every firm in that market is perfectly elastic. It's horizontal. That is, if one firm decides to charge a price that's even slightly higher than the prevailing market price, then no one will buy from that firm because everyone else is selling the exact same thing. So why would you pay more for something that's identical? And then we saw that in the monopolies case, that they're able to charge a different price for different people. They face the market demand curve. We'll see in the next slide here that the monopolistic competition kind of falls in between these two demand curves, which, makes sense. Monopolistic competition on the spectrum of competition falls in between perfect competition and monopoly. So the steepness of the demand curve will also fall in between the perfect competition demand curve and the monopoly demand curve. So again, this is just reiterating what I just said. So the demand curve faced by a perfectly competitive firm is perfectly elastic. It can sell all the output it wishes at the prevailing market price. If it tries to deviate from this price, then people can be very responsive to that price change and say, if you're going to charge a little bit more, I'm not going to buy from you because the person down the street selling the exact same thing as you is charging something less. So the demand curve faced by a perfectly competitive firm is perfectly elastic. The demand curve faced by a monopoly is the market demand curve. It can sell more output only by decreasing the price that it charges. So again, if you want a review of where these two demand curves came from, I do recommend going back to the Monopoly video that discussed this more thoroughly. So again, the demand curve faced by the monopolistic competitive firm falls exactly in between. It's not as flat as the perfect competitor's demand curve, but it's not as steep as the monopolies. It's kind of in between here. And the fact that it is in between here kind of determines these outcomes here. We'll explain the importance of this demand curve in the next video. And in the next video, we're going to be talking about how the monopolistically competitive firm chooses its output and price, just like we did for a monopoly. And we will see that in the short run, the monopolistic competition firm is able to make short-run profits just like a monopoly. It's able to charge a higher price than what the price would be in perfect competition. However, in the long run, the monopolistic competition firm behaves more like perfect competition and does not make any profits in the long term. So again, we'll be exploring all these ideas in the next video.